Hello, everybody. It has been a super interactive session before with Pablo, and I really liked him teasing up everybody. So this nice title comes from HashiCorp. So I'll talk a little bit about the regulatory environment, but I want to really take you on a journey on a little bit of engineering, a little bit of regulation, and BT. And everybody's talking about the history of BT. So I'll introduce myself and my area a bit more now. But so BT is even older than Zurich, 175 years old, more than 175 years old. There are people at BT who have been working longer at BT than my lifetime. And I'm here to take you on a journey as I take them on a journey in order to change their mindset. Fundamentally take them from legacy, end of service life, end of support into a modern environment where we quickly develop stuff. So, but British Telecom, for those who never heard about BT acronym, is one of the UK telco operators. In there, we've got a couple of different groups. One of the groups is called Network Services. So what you see on the right side is a couple of the things that we're doing there. So it's 5G. So you see the top right, bottom right rather. You see Wembley Stadium. So there's a lot of 5G in Wembley. Terabytes and terabytes of data are transmitted whenever there is an event. So Champions League last weekend, for example, was enormous strain on our network. But it's really great to see this really come to life. And then you see something very unusual for a telco provider. You typically think these are subsea cables. So the connection, mainland, UK mainland to Shetland, Orkney, stuff like this. And from time to time, there are submarines or other things, trawlers that hit those cables, pull them out of the ground, destroy them, stuff like this. And people need to travel up there in order to fix it. So we do a wide area of things. So fixed and mobile broadband, subsea cables, a little bit of satellite communication, TV, and the connection, the very, very important connection to the internet as well, so via routers and stuff like this. On my side, I look after security in this area. I work with quite a few different teams that are specialized in those areas for broadband, fixed broadband and mobile broadband and stuff like this. My team is really focused on the engineering side of things. So you heard about secure by design. It's really building in security from the start. You heard about secure by default, which means that we want to make sure that the easiest path to building a product or service is the secure one. So you talked about artifacts, stuff like this. And what is all in there? It is really about taking the colleagues and the customer along on the journey. It's really about engagement. So many of you have tried transformations. BT has done numerous transformations. We're currently in the middle of a transformation on security as well. We've got a big ambition. The ambition is 2030. We want to be the world's most trusted connector of devices, machines, and people. And this is a big and bold ambition. And we're trying to create the underpinning for this, which is a cloud strategy, but it's also DevOps and stuff like this. And keep in mind the 175 years of legacy that we have accumulated. So engagement. Who amongst the audience has heard about an author called Dan Pink? Ah, very good. There are a couple of people here. So Dan Pink is a person that has given TED Talks and others. He talks about motivation, and he talks about 3 types of motivation, or motivation 3.0 where he is now. So motivation 1.0 is probably the one that we had in the Bronze Age and Stone Age and stuff like this, where people were striving to survive. Okay, fair enough. So we moved on a little bit from that. Motivation 2.0 is what probably most of you and us are using on a regular basis. We're talking about carrots and sticks. And we believe that if we bring in an operating model with the right sticks and with the right carrots, then we'll get people exactly where they need to be. But what we often forget is we don't ask whether the colleagues and the people want to go there actually. And to talk about some of the bad incentives for carrots and sticks, and hey, Gen AI is very modern these days. So let's talk about an example that you were reading in The Guardian a while back. So there was a drone that was ordered to destroy an airport base or a military base, something like this. So the mission was given there. It was incentivized to do this. It flew, launched the virtual rockets, didn't really real rockets, and destroyed the target. Okay, fair enough. So the problem is it didn't stop there. It destroyed more targets there as well afterwards. So what it then did is, so the operator intervened and said that, hey, I will yank you back. You will not attack this target anymore. These are friends. Yanked it back. So what did the drone do? It turned around and shot at the operator because it was preventing the operator was preventing the drone from reaching the target. So you see those bad incentives are problematic. So Dan Ping talks about the intrinsic motivation. It's really that people understand the value and the purpose of what they need to do, and they get given both the capabilities, the freedom to do the right thing, and also to consider what is the best way to achieving it. And I want to talk a little bit about how we are facilitating this in BT in some examples without taking you too much into an engineering, because we had the leadership session, obviously. So that is me, secure by default. It's about engagement, taking my colleagues, taking our customers along on the journey. Some of the colleagues here will also be in the telco industry. I've seen Vodafone earlier, for example. And we currently have to jump through quite a few hoops in order to become compliant to a new regulation that came into force in April or March, rather, for the first step. It's a Telecom Security Act. So the idea there is Ofcom, so the telecoms a regulator, raises the cybersecurity bar over a couple of years. So there's 24 and 25 targets, and there's 27 and 28 targets. So let's move aside 25, 24, 25 for the time being. Let's focus on 7 and 8. In there, we are actually required to re-architect quite fundamentally our networks in areas that are in the scope of TSA. I don't know what the details for this, but it forces us to fundamentally reconsider and really sharpen the distinction between different domains and trust boundaries. So let's talk a little bit more about this today. So many of you today have environments where you've got a support group, support teams that need to access, build new systems, deployment, and I put in small little penguins, or for Linux, obviously, and then a terrible icon that I pulled out from Windows. That shall be a server in this case. So you need to build those up, you need to service them, you need to fix those little bugs that have creeped into the Linux environment there. And what you do there is actually, obviously, you connect to those devices in order to fix them. So while it's not yet all Terraform and not all automated and not all Ansible, stuff like this, most of the connections that we are doing these days are SSH. So one of the protocols there, fairly secure protocol, but it comes with a caveat. Before we go there, as I said earlier, TSA, so the Telecom Security Act, imposes segmentation or separation into our architecture today. So we've got networks and we've got management planes. So we need to manage those networks. We need to see what they are doing. Are they behaving correctly? To take a concrete example, we've got our fixed network. So you've got the cabling that comes from OpenReach and stuff like this. And then on top of this, we set up all of the infrastructure that manages this, connects the machines to each other. And we need to observe this. Similar to your IT department, they will observe what you're doing in the cloud. You talked earlier about cost control, stuff like this. So this is observing. TSA forces us to separate this very clearly from each other. So different trust boundaries, or domains as we call them. We've got 4 of them. There was an idea to have 6. There was some grandiose idea of having 16. Ooh, wow, I'm not sure if I want to cross 16 different boundaries. So crossing those 2 already is a struggle today. So what we do there is, and most entities do this, we bring in a jump server, a proxy if you want, that sits in the middle, that makes sure that it authenticates whoever is on the left side here, the service team, identity management, before they allow you to connect to the right side. What is your first reaction of this? Very, very old school, very manual. It will take time. There are some other problems. Sorry. The connection here, you need credentials. So these credentials, you try to get them in your head, and then you have 2 machines, you've got 4 machines, you've got 100 machines, you've got 1,000 machines, credentials there. So either people go for, well, I just reuse the same credentials, or, well, I make something simple, I rotate it, or I name it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got some nice password basis, and then I add numbers at the end of it. So really, really bad practices come very quickly around this. So let's talk about what we can do about this and introduce three notions. Most of you know this, so I will just go over this slide fairly quickly. But there is privileged access management. So it's really about non-privileged versus privileged access. Very easy to understand this concept. Identity and access management is typically what you see with the cloud as well. So this is role-based access typically. So I assume a role, and with this role, I can do certain things. And then as a complement to this, and we'll talk more about this, it's really about the credential secrets management that really works in tandem with this. So the problem statement here is that you want to have entities with a certain password, and obviously, please, stronger passwords than this, obviously, connect to the target machines. So this is step 1. Step 2 is you also want to, for example, make it harder for certain groups to get to certain target machines. So I want this user here that I identified only get to this Windows server and not to the Linux machine, because this is outside of their scope. So what we want to have in there is some kind of credential management, because we want to move those passwords away. And we want to have dynamic privileged access. So why is this important? There are a couple of things that you can read through. I would focus on the middle one. Root cause of supply chain attacks. Many of you heard about SolarWinds before. So SolarWinds 123 was the password that was used. And this password was then publicly accessible via misconfigured GitHub repo. That can happen to all of us, and that will happen. That is very, very likely to happen to all of us. We've got thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of credentials. So BT has about 120,000 employees right now that need to serve different customers, access many, many different systems, millions on millions of credentials. So what we see today is very clearly, and if you've read over the last couple of weeks, the ransomware gangs that made inroads, it's very often the same sequence of events. They get access to an employee's credentials. With the employee credentials, they go into the system. Then they download potentially a password database and go from there further, or do lateral movement. But the first step is the employee credential. Often, what was mentioned recently as well is that those credentials were actually shared by the employee in their Google Password Manager, in their Azure Password Manager, something where they mixed even personal credentials and company credentials. Very, very problematic, but very common that it's happening. So how do we address those risks? Well, Vault, you've seen quite a bit today. So Vault gives you the possibility to move those credentials into a secure enclave. Very practical, but it doesn't really give a great experience yet. It doesn't leverage really the power of Vault about dynamic credential management, stuff like this. We don't have this yet. So very simply, quote unquote, we combined it with Boundary, which does, for those who are not familiar with the product so much, is essentially authenticated remote connections. I think Arman called it this morning. So it's a bit of a middle ground between PAM and IAM. Who in the audience has used Boundary already? Very few? Timid hands in some corners? Okay, fair enough. It is very powerful combined with Vault. And it gets even more powerful if you connect it to your enterprise identity management systems. Why is this triumvirate so powerful? We've got quite a few expected and a couple of unexpected benefits. So if you move credentials into Vault, you've got a safe place to store them. The problem there is you need to have a master password or something like this in order to get to those credentials, and you just move the problem to some degree to the side. I mean, you reduce the amount of credentials that an employee needs to retain, but they still need to retain some credentials. Boundary, privileged access management, you do not need to authenticate to the Vault instance anymore. That's already good. So there, it gives me the tokens that I need. It also helps with accessing the systems that I am supposed to access, the Linux machines, if this is in my remit, or the Windows machine, if this is my remit. And if you do this then with the identity management system, and this is the way that BT has implemented this, it actually becomes completely passwordless. And what's the advantage of passwordless? Nobody can steal the credentials. So, what is the problem with passwordless? When you've got this renewal cycle of your Windows machine or Linux machine at work, and after 3 years, you need to remember the credentials that you had at the time in order to start your machine, because you need to transfer your instance over to the new machine, then you've got a problem. Okay? So my recommendation, go passwordless, but have a very strong, long passphrase that you will remember also in the future and that you might rotate as well. So again, going back to what we had initially, so 175 years of legacy versus today. So credentials were manually managed, on paper, post notes, all of this stuff, text files. Well, we moved it from human-readable passwords to machine. Another advantage of using Vault and boundary combination is that you actually move away from having your password 123 to certificates, to dynamic credentials, all of the goodies that Armand talked this morning about. And we really can leverage this. So these dynamic credentials, one-time credentials, very, very strong, possible to do in systems that support it alongside with Vault. The other one is shared access. What we've seen time and again is password resharing. It is just very convenient. Yeah, come, take this password from me. It's really, yeah, you can use it just once, and then you forget it. Obviously, you don't forget about. So you really want to restrict it to the minimum amount of people. And Boundary does this really well, transparent. And so credentials are managed by Vault, strong as possible, and they are not exposed to colleagues. So you don't have to remember them. It's just transparently managed for you. And then, as I said, I mean, this is Azure Active Directory integration, or Entra ID as it's called now. So in our case, this gives a fully passwordless experience. So I talked about engagement earlier on. Now I've been talking about security and password. What do you think is the engagement part in there? It's super fast. Think about what you had to do earlier. You logged onto your laptop, password. From there, you identify the target machine. What do I need to do? Okay, more credentials. Let's look it up in my text file. Type in the credential. It takes ages. It's obviously unsecure because if somebody gets hold of the text file, they've got all of the credentials of the target machine, often admin, because you need to do patching stuff like this. Now it's like this. It's done for you. You just authenticate, you start. I want to access SSH machine, whatever the identifier is, and you're connected there with the privileges that you require. It's instantaneous, it's frictionless. And frictionless security is really what drives engagement. This is where we see a mindset shift with our audience. People understand the purpose of it, and they are not slowed down by security. Keep in mind, security is really like the brakes on a car. You want to have security there so that you can accelerate at full speed and can safely come to a stop if it's required. But you do not want to have it make a noise all the time. It's really there to allow everybody to go faster. So purpose, great security, frictionless security, great customer experience. So we only started this journey now, and there are a couple of things that, that we brought together, but a couple of numbers, because we're in the leadership track. So we already were able to eliminate about 50,000 credentials that were not required to be used anymore. I mean, we can still authenticate to those target machines, as I said earlier, but it's dynamic credentials, it's one-time credentials. It's really the highest level that Vault offers today, and the target machines support as well. So we really want to go passwordless across all of our employees, all of our subcontractors, and all of the visitors that interact or service at BT. This has not always everything to do with Vault and HashiCorp product. It is more the Entra ID integration, but passwordless has been a game changer for us. We talked quite a bit about secure by default, design patterns, templated artifacts, was all mentioned earlier today. And again, it's a proof design pattern. So security is happy as well. I mean, I'm happy, but the reviewer, second line, third line, they review, they see this, hey, this is an artifact that has been pre-approved, no issues, done with it. And then internally, so we've got a now quarterly survey. There's one question in there. It says essentially, doing things around here is very easy. And you all know, if this question comes up, you think about the one example where it's really, really difficult to do something, because I had to do something the other day. It was really tricky to do this. And I remember this one. I will bring it up and say it like this. So the scores for this in many technical teams are very low. My team is very, very low, admittedly. But we have seen a major change already now, because previously people complained about security being slower. Think about the brakes and the noise and the, you know, what you hear. So removed those hurdles as well. And people understand again, so we need to do security, and there is no more friction. I do not have this noise anymore. It is a nicely integrated solution that moves us forward. And with this, I'm stopping. Thank you all.